Sechaba Maape.
For sure.
How you doing, bro?
I'm good, and you?
I'm alright, thanks. Thank you for the off-camera chats. I think some of these chats actually help me try and figure out what I'm trying to do. Because most of us, when we start podcasting or sitting on platforms, we don't know what we're doing. We have an idea of, I just want to sit with people, but we don't know. And I think once you start building a brand, sometimes the brand moves faster than you. To a point where people like yourself come to me and you're like, look, I'm looking for this. I'm like, oh, no, I don't do that. You're like, but the work you've done. And I'm like, oh, shit. Maybe I'm mis-selling myself. But thank you for challenging me and for forcing me to think.
Sure.
Welcome to the platform. I'm honored that you reached out to me, and I was fascinated by the mini profile that you gave me. People struggle to sit with me, not that I'm important, because I'm really not. But most people don't have online content. Most people don't have an interesting story. And they're like, I want to come to your platform. I'm like, I don't even think I'm the right person.
Yeah.
Go sit with your homies. Go sit with someone else. And then maybe you can come to me when it makes sense. If you can please indulge us on your background, who you are, what you do, why you even reached out to me in the first place.
All right. Yeah. Well, thanks, Peniel. Thanks for inviting me. My name is Sechaba. I'm an architect in training, or by training, and I'm also an academic and a thinker and a philosopher, and someone who is always trying to think about where I live, South Africa, and what South Africa could be. You could call me a utopianist.
Idealist.
And I'm a complete idealist.
Yeah.
I'm also someone who's very interested in black intellectuals and black thinkers, which is, a history that not many people talk about in South Africa. I was born in the Northern Cape province to a very political family, which is where I think all of this comes from.
So you guys have money at home?
No, not really.
I've never met anyone who comes from a political family where they have a lot of money who's like, we actually have a lot of money at home.
No, it's not like that.
It's not like that?
Yeah, because think about it. It just depends on which side of the factions you're in.
Or within the ruling party?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if they dribble you, you're out.
Your family is popular?
In the Northwest, a little bit. Because
you don't want to give them a shout out?
Who, my family?
Yeah.
I can. I mean, and everyone knows that my dad is a premier. He's a premier in the Northwest.
Come on. Siyabonga.
That's what
That's the only reason I invited you here, Baba.
I knew that.
We're pretending to speak about architecture. No, I'm kidding. But shout out to your dad.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I come from a very political family. Grew up with a lot of, you could say, political consciousness. And so, later in my life, I went and I studied architecture at Wits, and I've been an academic ever since.
Why architecture? Why Wits?
Why Wits? Because at the time it seemed like the most prestigious institution and one of the most progressive, which is very questionable.
Progressive is like for diversity and race.
And also ideas.
Okay.
Mainly ideas.
Okay.
I remember when I was in high school and I told my principal that I want to go to Wits. He's like, oh, you want to go to the Toy University? And so, and that really was the thing that drew me to Wits.
Yeah.
And architecture, because I'm very much into art and design. But I'm also very much into fantasy.
Okay.
When I talk about fantasy, I'm talking about video games. I'm talking about things like movies, films, anything that is really about imagining, some kind of alternative paradigm or world.
You were a nerd and a geek.
Too much. I still am very much like that.
Do you know where that comes from? Is it just
My
you?
Dad.
Your dad's also a nerd and a geek.
But hardcore.
That's dope. Your dad. So I'm trying to think of my family. I realized later on, because my brother's like a slay king. I don't know if there's a thing like that. He loves taking pictures and he germs, no, take a video. And when I look at the history, my father, his brothers, my cousins, from back in the early 90s were some of the first people I knew with video cameras, and they used to document everything.
Sure.
So I realized this is like a family thing, that we just loved content back then.
Yeah.
were the things that your dad was into when you were young. He bought you your first video game. He was into, like, let's have chats about, did you see the technology? What's up? What?
No, not like that. He was more like, I want to be modern. He was a modernist in all respects. You know, for example, he really didn't, go. He didn't want us to be overly conservative in our outlook in life. So, if, for example, we go to a place to eat, he'll start talking about, how as black people, we need to be confident in these spaces. We cannot walk around here in shame. And then he'll start, calling the waiter, hey.
Jeez.
Because he constantly wanted to show us, especially depending on the profile of the waiter, he wanted to show us that in a space like that, you are not going to behave like you're inferior.
Yeah.
So that thing was in us from the beginning.
You've never had an inferiority complex?
No, I mean, I think everyone in different moments have, you doubt yourself a little bit, but fundamentally we were raised to be confident.
I've been struggling with imposter syndrome for a long time.
Yeah.
And even to date, in a restaurant, it still feels awkward sending another black person to go and get something for you that you can get for yourself.
Sure.
And I've had to work on that. And someone maybe listening to the story in an isolated clip would probably think, oh, your dad was being bougie. He was, and it's like, no, I need you guys to understand that you deserve to be here and we deserve to be great. There's nothing wrong with having a king mindset.
No, so what he would do when it was African waiters, for instance, he would have the most incredible conversations with them. I mean, he does this thing where he will joke with someone and be like, Wena, did I not see you somewhere? I think you are my daughter. Are you not my daughter? He did that once, and then this lady actually got incredibly emotional because she thought he was actually her dad. But anyway, the point is, my dad really taught us that, to understand the context of South Africa, to recognize that right from the beginning, African people were made to feel inferior.
Correct.
And to be made to, see themselves as less than whoever. And he was adamant about that from the beginning. And you see some of the things that he taught us in terms of not being overly conservative were primarily to deal with that because, I guess it was just progressive ideas as far as he was concerned. Although now in my, adult life, I question a lot of some of that stuff.
And you maybe reflecting more on the African conservative way?
Yeah, exactly.
Actually, I want to ask about your mom and your siblings before we go down that rabbit hole. But there's something I wanted to say. Yesterday, I think it was yesterday. We constantly speak about how white people refuse to assimilate to blackness and Africanness on the African continent.
Sure.
They don't want to speak our languages. They mispronounce our names, whether on purpose or otherwise. And they just are not interested. And it inflames a lot of black people, especially conscious black people and passionate black people. You can't even pronounce my name. You can say Tsunami, but you can't say Tsepo. Get the hell out of here.
Chipu.
Of course, Chepo. I started thinking yesterday, speaking about your father's view on modernity. Why would you assimilate to cultures and languages and ways of being that have been proven to be dominated in the past? And that might be one of the reasons that white people are like, I mean, we have got a similar dynamic with tribalism, where Zulus refuse to assimilate to other cultures. You've got black South Africans who look down on other black Africans. And it might be because we look down on, why would I want to learn Shona? Why would I want to understand Malawian culture? You guys are poor. Mina ngumZulu, I'm from the Zulu kingdom. Why would I go down? So maybe they have that type of mindset. And this is not me speaking about your father because I have no idea. But there could have been a school of thought to say, if we have been conquered by this technology or this group of people or those weapons, maybe let's learn them. Since I've seen how this world is moving and maybe where it's going, I would like to empower my children with the English language because it can allow you to travel the world, learn how to use technology, learn how to have a superiority potential complex because that's what I've seen globally the people that get to live a comfortable life get to have. The problem with our generation now is we're starting to not even starting, we've been questioning, maybe let's call it white supremacy, the colonizer mindset, and then looking into African ways of living that maybe even today where white people are struggling, health, their happiness, you're like, actually guys, we had solutions back then that were kind of whitewashed when you guys came through and said we are better because we beat you in war. But there are other parts where we were actually superior and you guys never got a chance. So now we're exploring those. What are your thoughts around why you're questioning the stance?
Because I feel like, ultimately, as a human being, we need to all strive for the best outcomes for humanity, I think. At least that's my philosophy.
As a general or as an individual pursuit?
As an individual, but also humanity in general. We
Okay.
need to strive for, and remember I said I'm a utopianist.
Yeah.
And I'm an idealist. So I'm striving for an ideal, right? Because if we're not striving for an ideal, what are we striving for? I don't know.
Yeah.
Obviously, we'll have to discuss what the ideal is.
Sure.
But I'm striving for the ideal. And if someone, whether you're black, white, Zulu, Xhosa, are demonstrating something that's not the ideal, why should I strive for that?
Yeah.
And so I've seen that in South Africa, some of the things that we've adopted, and I've particularly seen this in my field of architecture, that we've adopted unquestioningly.
Yeah.
Like, for example, people talk about the notion of reason and rationality, and some of the ways in which architects who come from Europe sold European architecture as universal was because it was supposed to be superior in terms of reason and rationality.
Yeah.
And so, for instance, which was in hindsight very superficial, they'll say, a building has to have straight corners and 90 degrees and whatever, because this is the most rational and ideal thing. But then if you actually look at it, it's very expensive to maintain white cleanness, white clean lines.
Yeah.
It's financially and also in terms of material very expensive to maintain that. And it also doesn't prove to weather very well in different regions. So if you go to Nigeria and you look at how the concrete interacts with the humidity, or just Durban, you can see that this thing wasn't really made for this sort of context.
Yeah.
So you see, I think because of the way in which my dad allowed us to question everything and to challenge things and to be confident about where you stand in things, I ended up, questioning a lot of things that were around me and recognizing that this guy, just because he's whoever he is not necessarily superior.
Correct.
Yeah.
Shout out to your father. The influence of your mom, and if you have any siblings, if you'd like to mention the influence of your mother in your life, and then maybe talk about any siblings or cousins that have made an impact in your upbringing.
Yeah, so my mom is all about strength. She's an incredibly strong person.
Emotionally.
Emotionally, politically, intellectually. She's kind of like, I compare her to Winnie Mandela.
Okay.
The character that she has.
Yeah.
And I mean, to have my dad as someone that, you're hooked up with, you have to be like that. She's incredibly strong, So I think my mom is probably a bit patriarchal, if I think about it. She's probably the opposite of a feminist in a sort of stereotypical sense, because she was always like, you have to be a man. You have to be a man. I mean, she raised 3 boys, so I can imagine maybe that's where that came from. But she was militant in her ways. And even now, she's still very much active politically and still very much disciplined and militant in her ways.
You sound like Maihlome Chwete when he speaks about his mom. I don't know if he calls her something. Comrade something. He calls her comrade. I don't know what he calls his mom. But we know Steve Chwete, his father, who became an icon, and he was Minister of Sports when the Springboks lifted the World Cup in 95. Yeah. But he speaks about having a militant mom.
Sure.
And we have tried, I think, maybe not well enough in this country, to highlight the wives of male political leaders. But maybe this generation of women maybe are not being taught enough. Not necessarily that they were right, but just like the colonial argument, to be like, maybe they were playing second fiddle, I can be powerful on my own today, but it's what can we learn from these women? Winnie Mandela, no, she shouldn't have done that. Nelson, what? You're like, I think we might be missing some of the stories here.
Sure.
And I don't know if enough of people like your mom, I don't know if they're going out to actually speak on behalf of a woman who works with a powerful man or is in partnership with a powerful man, what it's like to be a mother under those conditions.
Sure.
I mean, we all have assumptions around how Winnie was a mom. The dynamics of being forced to be masculine at a time when you didn't want to be.
Sure.
And the transition from forced masculinity and being strong because it's all you had to be at the time to how do you then raise daughters today. I know Umamu Lindiwe Zulu because I've spoken to her daughter. You want to figure out, are you raising your daughter with maybe potential traumas?
Sure.
Do you want her to be strong? Are the daughters in happy relationships? Or are they, what's that dynamic?
Sure.
What's your view on, I don't know if you know enough of them, or your view on the children of political leaders, especially anti-apartheid stalwarts, because I normally bash a lot of them.
Hey, a lot of them are bashable.
Jeez.
Yeah, a lot of them are bashable. I think it depends on when you're talking about them. Are you talking about them after the 2000s? Not in terms of birth, but after, that era.
Yeah.
Are you talking about them during the Mbeki times, the Zuma times, the Mandela times? When are you talking about them? Because they've also gone through an evolution.
True. Have you guys failed us? This is one of the things I discussed with Tutuzane Zuma. And it was one of the myths that he broke for me. But I saw it during the lockdown. He did it was a virtual chat with his dad, Jacob Zuma. And there were questions he was asking him. And the way he asked the questions, I was like, this guy actually doesn't know.
Yeah.
So when I met him and I asked about his relationship with his father, one of the things that came out was, hey, bro, I'd also see this guy on TV like other people. And then maybe when I go home, I'd see him, I'm like, hey, old man, what's up? And then it's like, hey, you've got a new brother, a new sister. Like, yes, sis. Every festive season, there's a new release from this guy. And I realized that a lot of these kids, I think I spoke to the daughters as well, Za, JZ, and Umamu, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma.
Yeah.
And they, unlike your dad, they were like their parents kept them far away from politics, by the way. So they only started hating white people like later on, but it wasn't from the parents.
Sure.
So I'm trying to figure out, have you guys failed us in the sense that this was your dad, this was your mom, bro? I mean, if you are Mandla Mandela, then obviously you need to be like the next president. If you are Maihlome Chwete, which is something I poke him about all the time.
Yeah.
I'm like, bro, you guys must lead. He's like, hey, chief, I worked in government, I served. It's your turn. I'm going into business now.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a responsibility to carry on from your parents' work? Are you guys failing us? Even if it's not serving, but just in schooling the rest of us, sitting down with Julius, Ndlozi, Nhlanhla Lux, and being like, bro, I'm not into politics, but my parents. So because you look like maybe whatever my dad was, can I maybe just tell you some of the things or introduce you to my family so that we can do something for the future?
I would imagine actually that maybe my dad may have not completely concealed me from having a political consciousness, but I think our parents probably did want us to not live the life that they lived.
Yeah.
There's nothing glamorous about campaigning and dealing with politics. It's not glamorous. And I think, if they had another option, had they not had to go through the struggle in the way they did. I mean, my dad always told me that had he not had to go to Robben Island, be jailed, and go through everything he did, he would have wanted to be a scientist, So, I mean, why then would one want to get their children to, spend time...
Do something they were forced to do, and it's not something they wanted to do.
Exactly. And I think, wanting your child to be a scientist or whatever aspiration is possibly part of the struggle, because you see them as maybe the person who then in the next generation take over and do something about other domains of life other than just politics.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then at the same time, I think the money thing is also an issue.
Yeah.
Because I see a lot of guys who whose parents were in politics and then later through whatever means got their hands on money.
Hey, through whatever means.
Through whatever means.
Yeah.
I don't know, you know. And you see that there's a new money issue there.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a new money issue, and people kind of don't realize that they don't realize how Penuel knows how money works.
Yeah.
You've got to build capital, and you've got to put that capital in a place where it's going to grow.
Yeah.
People think money is about spending, and you actually see this happening even in the new money of the politicians,
Correct.
the young guys, even today.
Yeah.
You know, and for me that's sad. And then the other thing is, I don't know whether politicians will tell their kids everything.
Okay.
I don't think they're going to tell them. I mean, I don't know what I don't know from my dad or
Yeah.
from anyone. I have no idea. You know, I don't sit there at Lutili House with them and chat about
Study
whatever
everything and ask everything. No, that's fair.
I'm busy trying to, you know, get my things done at Wits.
Sure.
I don't have time to. And so I can see that there's like a whole world there and a whole dynamic there that I'm actually probably deliberately kept away from.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if you know too much, maybe that might be problematic for you.
Circumstance drove your parents into politics? What circumstance do you think we have today as an obligation? Because I think at the time they felt it was an obligation. Your dad could have gone into science. It would have been very difficult, but he could have been like, screw this politics stuff. I'm going to push, even if it means I need to go and study overseas. But he was like, I think this is a bigger calling. Do you feel we have a bigger calling now, and are we meeting it?
Again, Penuel, your show for me is about consciousness.
Yeah.
Man. It's about consciousness. It's about talking about, you know, all kinds of dimensions of life that people generally have silenced or are silent to them, maybe because of a lack of knowledge or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So, you know, how many people out there are Penuels and have consciousness? I've met people at Wits who are academics,
Yeah.
who have PhDs and are professors and whatever, and are so clueless.
Yeah.
And have such a small world.
Yeah.
And are so boxed. And those are people who are supposed to be in like the, you know, the upper echelons of knowledge and exposure.
Making futuristic decisions.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So what more now, ordinary people? I think it's maybe just an innate thing. There are maybe some people who will be born to be Sol Blackies and Steve Bikos and Penuels. And maybe some people just won't.
Sure.
You know, I don't know if consciousness is a genetic thing. Having a really exposed consciousness,
Yeah.
being able to absorb more, being able to perceive more.
Being more curious.
Yeah, being more curious. So I think maybe the guys who ended up in politics like that, perhaps that was it. You know, if everyone around you is saying, you know, we mustn't fight with these Afrikaans people because, you know, we just want things to stay stable. And you're like, no. Maybe it's also ego. Maybe it's just like, me, I'm not going to wash dishes for that guy. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
So I do think that people are just, they might have just an innate, you know, capacity towards actions that, you know, emerge out of their consciousness.
Are you and your siblings the same? Would they also describe themselves as thinkers, philosophers, idealists, utopianists?
They are probably all very... I'd think influenced by my dad's influence because we were all raised in the same way.
Yeah.
But they're all also individuals.
Okay.
You know? And they have their own, you know, dynamics, to put it like that.
Okay. If you were to give advice to the generation after the fighters of political freedom, what would you advise them? Would you be like, just live your life? Or guys, look, our parents fought. As much as you're living your life, maybe consider this.
But who am I talking to? You see?
You, speaking to yourself, speaking to people like my Shlomes, people like Dutuzane, etc.
Again, you know, I qualified myself as an idealist.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine some of the people we're talking about, or not necessarily the ones you've listed, but generally those type of people having these sort of idealistic values or worldviews.
Yeah.
So what am I going to say to them? You know, guys, let's make South Africa this like powerhouse, ideal place? What if someone's just looking out for themselves?
Yeah.
What if they're just like, hey, I want what's mine?
Is that good enough?
For me, it's not. For me, it's not. For me, I'm very interested in literally what could South Africa and our cities be like in their, having achieved their greatest potential.
Yeah.
That's what I dream about. That's what I want to see.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm interested in your show. That's why I'm interested in the people that you bring along, because they all seem to be interested in similar kinds of things.
Yeah. Thank you. You touched on architecture. I studied art in high school, so we studied a lot of the architecture around the world, of which, I think the Greeks and those guys probably thought they were superior. Today we've got Dutch influence, of course, in the Western Cape. We had Sir Herbert Baker, built St. John's, St. George's Cathedral, some of the best, I think the Union buildings, some of the greatest pieces of architecture in the country. And then you spoke about the relevance of architecture within certain spaces. And before you came here today, one of the things you and I touched on was the future of building cities and architecture. And in my head, I'm also thinking, how do we merge what we build with nature? This now maybe goes into an African and a context specific. But before you unpack that, the history of our country, not the furthest history, but just apartheid, spatial planning. And many people call townships concentration camps. Yeah. Do you share the same view? Where do you see maybe townships going, villages going? And after that, maybe you can touch on what you think of Orania and places like Stain City, Waterfall City, etc.
Townships, I grew up in a township.
Which one? Give a shout out.
It's called Mutibistad. It's in Kuruman. So I'm from the Northern Cape in Kuruman. And yeah, some of my family still live there. Many people still live there. And I think it's complex, right? So when you're born and all you know is the township, you love it. Because what more do you know?
Sure.
That's home.
Sure.
And it's home for me, and I still feel like that. When I go there, we still have our 4-room house, which belongs to my dad there. And, I spend a lot of time in that place. In fact, my research was about my home. My PhD was about my home. I love it, right? But at some point, I went to Wits and I discovered that the guy who designed the townships was actually a professor from there.
From Wits?
Yeah. His name is Kelderwood. He was the head of school. And this guy took that design. Some people claim it was taken from him, but I believe he took that design and took it to the CSIR, which, as you know, was very complicit in apartheid at the time. And they then spread it across. There's this one colleague of mine who basically wrote a paper arguing that when Kelderwood designed the 4-room, he actually designed it as a utopian vision for Africans. He's going to build these beautiful places for Africans to live. And
so Kelderwood may have had good intentions. Is what you're saying?
That's what this person is arguing.
Okay.
I'm not necessarily saying,
Okay.
That's what this person is arguing. I don't know.
Do you mind mentioning their race?
I think you could imagine what race they are.
Please carry
on. And so, my having, and this is someone who's never lived in a township, right? So when you go there, and, I don't know how many South Africans have gone through what I've gone through. You've lived in the township your whole life, and then you go and work at the place where the person who designed the place where you stay and then you understand the intentions behind what they were doing, you suddenly recognize that. So can you imagine that? It's like, I don't know, it's like someone who was in a concentration camp and was born there and lived there for their whole life.
They had fun, they listened to music, and everyone was chilling.
Yeah, and then one day you go to the office of like the main guy at the concentration camp and you look at a file and you realize, oh, this is actually meant to be hell for me. You see.
Is it a danger of exposure? There's a philosophical question. If a tree falls in a forest, does it make a sound or does anyone hear it? And I'd follow up with, do you know that you're poor until you're exposed to rich people?
That's an interesting philosophical question.
Yeah.
I know that the evidence for me that people were not comfortable in the townships is when you see the proliferation of aspiration.
Yeah.
People are building bigger houses. They're moving their toilets from outside to inside.
Yeah.
We grew up with a tap at the toilet outside. I was washing in a skotlolo.
Sure.
I even showed these colleagues of mine me washing in a skotlolo inside this asbestos roof.
They didn't believe
house. Not that they didn't believe me, but I needed people to understand that, some of us experience this. It's a lived experience. It's not some theoretical thing.
This was my real life.
Yeah. And so, for me, people may not know what they are missing out on or what they are negatively exposed to consciously. But their reactions and the things that they do subsequent to when they suddenly have resources is evidence for me that
they're not comfortable with the status quo.
Yeah, they're not happy with that. Exactly.
I was at Rhodes University and I had a guy from Botswana who stayed in my res. And he was sitting there being like, "You cheese boys know nothing," speaking to me. So I was born eKasi emadadeni. And then when I was five, my school teacher mom moved us to the suburbs where no Mandela and them started getting into power. This guy's like, "You cheese boys know nothing. Do you know there are still people that use paraffin lamps?" I said, I'm like, you talking to me? He's like, "Yeah." "And you know there are people that shit like in a long drop toilet." I'm like, "Bro, when I visit my grandmother and my grandmother's sister, that's our life. We herd cattle."
Yeah.
But you realize that, well, for whatever reason, if you're going to speak about your dad, people are like, "Oh, you probably grew up in Sandhurst and you are what." You're like, "Oh, it wasn't like that." But there's a lot of ignorance. We're speaking now about a different race.
Sure.
But this was literally from a black person from Botswana who was looking at me, listening maybe to the English I'm speaking and assuming that I don't have a lived experience of the struggle of black people where when you try and offer solutions, they're like, you're the last person to speak. Look at your life. You're like, "Oh, I'm not."
Yeah.
So you look at the township, you realize Calderwood was at Wits,
Yeah.
and you start realizing that, nah, this was not utopia.
Yeah, they didn't make sure.
And
So
I don't want to shade your colleague. So I'm like, fuck my colleague. He doesn't know what to talk about. But, you just want to be like, nah, this is not it.
No, and that's the thing, is that the issue is that people in the township sometimes, but because they have no choice, have this deep identity. It's like being raised by some guy who's not your dad.
Yeah.
And this guy has actually been molesting you your whole life.
Yeah.
But, you become attached to them because that's all you know as a father. And that's the sickness of the whole thing.
Stockholm Syndrome.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's the sickness of the whole thing, is that we were made to think that this is enough for us. This is good enough. They literally have a term in architecture called minimum standards. And so they were basically saying that the forum, as far as a human being is concerned, that is adequate as far as minimum standards are concerned. So in actual fact, we weren't, given what was required for our psyche, for our soul, but even just in terms of our bodies and in terms of our society, we weren't given what was required. And you realize that when it actually happened, when black people were given the forum the first time, there's evidence that shows that they tried to adapt. So, you come from a homestead where you've got your own hut as a man. There are 2 huts for your maybe 2 wives.
Yeah.
There are huts for the kids, etc., etc. There's a whole hierarchical system.
Yeah.
There's a whole gendered system that's happening there. There's evidence that shows that people tried to do that in the forum, inside the house. The boys would sleep in one room.
Yeah.
The girls would sleep in one room. In the dad and mom's room, the dad would have his bed, which was somehow concealed. The mom would have her bed. So people were trying to actually live the utopia they came from in a very sinister condition.
I want to ask about the villages. I was going to speak about flats, but I didn't want to jump to flats. But maybe let's speak about flats. Today, a lot of us, upwardly mobile, middle class, we rush to the cities and we almost live in something worse than a forum.
Yeah.
Because we live in these bachelor flats, which are like 1 room and a toilet.
Yeah.
And we celebrate it. We post it on Twitter, X, just bought my first property. And if you ever come from a township, you're living in a place smaller than that, way more expensive, but you're calling that success. And what would you think of the psychological aspect of living in townships and then contrasting it to those of us who believe we're middle class, drive GTIs, drink coffee at Tasha's and Starbucks, but we live in this small space. Do you think there's a similar psychological conditioning or?
Well, I can definitely say there's social issues. So, for example...
And now we live on top of each other. It's not even a forum in your yard. We're living on top of each other like ants.
Sure. Look, I mean, if we're talking about flats, we have to talk about the property industry.
Okay.
Because property developers, just like the Apartheid guys, were thinking about minimum standards, but in very different ways.
Yeah.
These guys are thinking about minimum standards as far as what is required for a return on investment. So they want to make sure that whatever they're building, it's going to meet certain criteria, but they're going to squeeze that space so much so that they can, whatever they invested in there, they're going to get something out. So there you'd have to talk to, the capitalists and the property guys.
Yeah.
And that's a whole system. And I don't know if you and me are able to deal with that other than, if we came up with a different model.
Yeah.
And some people are trying to come up with different models. And then in terms of the actual structure of the flat, I have 2 kids, right? And...
Congrats, by the way.
Thank you.
How old are the kids?
The one's 13, the one is 3.
That's dope.
4.
I've got a 13-year-old and a 3-year-old.
Okay.
I've got 1 million kids. So at any age, Baba, maybe I can match you. But my eldest son is 13 and my youngest is 3. So,
Sure. And, I always say to my son, why are you listening to us talk again? And he'll be sitting there, and sometimes I point at him and I'm like, look, you're doing it. You're staring at us. You're listening. Because we live in a place, I live in a townhouse, right? So it's not a space that is structured hierarchically for what I need culturally.
Yeah.
I don't want my son to listen to some of the things that I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And, he's so used to having friends who are used to that.
Yeah.
They sit with their parents and they listen to everything and they add one, two fagazing there. So that's not my culture and that's not what I'm used to. And, in maybe those other kids' cultures, there's a broader social and cultural system that absorbs that and it works for that.
Yeah.
If my child, which is a whole different topic, if my child takes some of those teachings and learnings from those cultures, they're not going to really survive within the broader social and cultural context that we're in. It's like the whole thing of, yo, mom, we want to go and sleep over at Vicky's house. Yeah. As a black kid, you can go sleep at Vicky's house, but you're going to get it twisted.
Yeah.
Compared to other people who go and sleep at Vicky's house and they can sleep in the same bed, wake up and there's no problem.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So I'm just saying that with my son, in that space, it's not conducive for the values that we have as a family, which is why, I'm having this conversation with you because it's about consciousness. Because our people buy into the stuff. They're just like, it's figile manj, sentin. But, what is sentin?
Yeah.
And how much was it actually designed for your needs and for your values?
I remember what I wanted to raise when you speak about minimum standards. I don't like chicken.
Yeah.
I'm one of those black people that don't like chicken, even though we've been told black people love chicken. I've tasted the meat. I'm not a food connoisseur at all. It's just me and my palate. You taste chicken, you taste mutton. I love mutton and lamb. You taste beef, you taste pork, etc. And at some point, because I hate the smell of chicken when it's being boiled. I hate it so much.
Yeah.
At some point, I was young. I was like, I think black people have mastered the art of creating so many different dishes out of chicken because it's all that they could afford at the time. And today we celebrate fried chicken, grilled chicken, chicken curry, chicken stew. I think about Jay-Z and them speak about grits.
Yeah.
We speak about offcuts. We speak about mochodu now. We speak about inyama yangaphakathi. And we celebrate it. We call it our culture. And hey, this is a traditional African dish. And it had me thinking of how many of the things we have come to accept as who we are, meanwhile we were forced by circumstance, which was engineered, from diet to the way we dress to the things we think are cool, living ekasi. You come from your little Santon flat, which is tiny, and then on the weekend, you go to Ekas, which feels more vibier and what,
Sure.
but you're moving from one almost little concentration jail cell to another one because that's what we've become accustomed to.
Sure.
Why do we not want to go back to the villages where we had vast land and the kids could walk around? And why do we not want to go there?
Because they were made to be seen as primitive. It was very deliberate. And, African people were made to feel like whatever it was that you were doing that was part of your culture, it was inferior. And that was a narrative that needed to be sustained, obviously, because you can't treat me like an object if you see me as a person.
Yeah.
If you see me as less than, then you're going to put me inside your minds and you're going to make me work for nothing so that you can amass incredible wealth, at a very low cost. So obviously, whatever we are experiencing today in terms of our self value has been influenced by that. But I want to talk about this issue of loving things that were engineered. I can give you two examples. One example is pap. Why do people love pap so much? Where does pap come from? And how is pap now become this staple in South Africa?
Yeah.
People will even say pap is a traditional food. Pap doesn't come from South Africa.
Maize is not originally grown here.
Yeah, you know that. And pap is not the most healthy thing to eat either. When people were, before, we were so influenced by colonization, we were eating, beans, we were eating different types of pumpkins, and food that was a lot more nourishing to us compared to pap.
Yeah.
So that's the one. Number two, in the township, at least where I come from, a lot of houses have peach trees.
Yeah.
And you'll hear people talk about, the peach tree. This is something that I'm passionate about.
We had peach trees in Matadene.
Sure.
Yeah.
Kelderwood designed the peach tree to be part of the township house. He actually wanted to test what is the most resilient tree that can survive in a context where they're going to provide little water. So he, in fact, there's the story in the same lady's paper where Kelderwood in his own yard did a sketch of the Kasi house. And he was trying to plant different things and it was failing for a long time.
Built a little Kasi house within his yard.
Yeah.
To experiment.
A little model.
Must be nice.
To experiment. And then eventually, apparently, his gardener decided to plant a peach tree in this little sketch that he made. And that held. And that's why, apparently, peach trees are so prolific in the township. So what does that mean? That means there's so many other things.
I hate the story you're selling right now, because now it's like we have to boycott pap and peaches.
I'm not saying...
Peaches are delicious and uputu is delicious, but I can imagine, specifically when you speak about pap, how it sits in your stomach and it makes you feel full so that you can go work.
Sure.
We'll give you this thing. You see it now even with construction workers and gardeners. They have this ice cream container of pap.
Yeah.
Even if it's just got gravy and it gets them going throughout, you're like, we'll give them minimal fuel, minimum standards to just keep going.
Exactly.
But now you're ruining peaches as well.
Look, the thing is, people do adapt these things out of necessity to incorporate them to be part of their culture. That's why there's Kasi for life, and whatever other things people say. But the problem is sometimes because of the desperate situation of adapting in that way, we may have now ultimately sold ourselves the fact that this is now, who we are.
Yeah.
And it makes it very difficult to pivot into something else.
Yeah.
To actually recognize that we are human beings that are valuable and we should demand more of our circumstances.
Yeah. Are we too psychologically broken to consider moving back to the villages? Talk about people like me and you. Why are we failing to maybe turn townships into Orania? If we're going to assume that Orania is maybe idealistic for white Afrikaners, why are we failing to turn villages into Stain City, Waterfall City? And we've got people like you. So you're an educated, skilled black man who can literally take Stain City, go to Msinga, and build it there. Why are we not doing that?
Yeah, you see, now that's where we come into the issue of capital. Because, as you know, To build a whole city, you need capital. And this is one of the topics I'm most passionate about, is black capital. Because, take Mansa Musa, for instance. Mansa Musa was a patron. When Thabo Mbeki talked about the African Renaissance, I actually suspect that he looked at the guys in those times of Mansa Musa who had money, who were actually commissioning things.
Yeah.
They would commission beautiful buildings, they would commission artworks, they would commission whatever.
The wealthiest man to ever live.
Sure.
Yeah.
And if you look at the actual Renaissance of Europe, that's when there was a proliferation of all sorts of things, including new financial systems, including
The
new
Rothschilds.
Yeah.
The Medicis.
Exactly,
Yeah.
including new forms of art and even what we call architecture today.
Yeah.
The very European idea of architecture today was born there, but it had a lot to do with capital, with people wanting to spend their money on ideals.
Michelangelo and Da Vinci and those guys, to what you're saying, were commissioned. And speaking of Utabo, I don't know if you're going to mention it, and I'm sorry. There was a time when I was like, why is the ANC not commissioning artists to create statues and artworks and paintings so that in future you can be like, oh, these sculptures and these artworks were born of the ANC organization, including music.
Sure.
We will commission music. Just make music for people.
Yeah, there's a whole dynamic when it comes to government commissioning things.
Yeah.
We all know the challenges there. But what about...
Sure, you were saying Utabo maybe looked at that when you were speaking about an African Renaissance.
Exactly. So I think, and that's what I was about to touch on now, I think what we need is black patrons. And I've been talking about this for a very long time, that right now in South Africa, what do we know the black patrons to be spending their money on? So take, for instance, Patrice Motsepe. He's passionate about soccer.
Yeah.
So he's put his money into soccer.
Yeah.
He's basically a patron of that team, right?
Sure.
And we can see the performance of that team.
Yeah.
So clearly there's a correlation between patrons and us achieving whatever ideals.
Sure.
So the question is, where are the black patrons in South Africa? And what can they achieve?
Yeah.
Recently I watched a documentary about one of the richest guys in Germany. It was on DW, and this guy commissioned a music hall. Now, this music hall was designed by one of the most powerful and well-celebrated architecture firms, right? If you are an architecture student, you look at that and you'll be like, hey, man, if only I could design like these guys and do wonderful stuff, and I'm going to study so hard. What they don't tell you is that they're connected to a patron.
Yeah.
It's actually the patron. I'm more interested in the creative mind of that patron rather than the creative mind of the architect. Because clearly if you've got a patron like that, can you imagine if we had a black guy who was like, I am so into architecture and I want to see architecture in South Africa become just like out of this world, especially designed by black people.
You're giving me goosebumps, man. You've got my mind spinning. So one of my first mentors in Joburg was a gentleman by the name of Jack. He studied to be a chartered accountant. He became a chartered accountant. He was with PricewaterhouseCoopers. He was seconded to London with Chow Chow. They bumped into Moody's. They learned about ratings. They came back to South Africa and they conceptualized BEE ratings. And they set up Empowered, etc. I met him. And one of the things he told me is that he always wanted to be a filmmaker. He's also a jazz singer and a jazz pianist. He's like, I wanted to be a filmmaker. And at the time I was like, why don't you fund film? And he was like, I'd love to when I get the chance. And I guess he probably becomes one of my trauma case studies of why you mustn't put off your passion.
Sure.
Because you might get caught up doing whatever it is that you do and you never get to your passion.
Sure.
But in what you're saying, the idea of patronage, because people that are going to be watching this are going to be thinking, Robert Gumede, I think Mike Nkuna with Masingita does well, but I don't think his properties are artistic more than functional and for business. Patrice, of course, Cyril Ramaphosa, Daphne Nkosi, and all these people, versus there's that which we have to discuss. We have to. And then we also need to speak down of the little 5,000 rand you have,
Sure.
and being a patron at your old high school, at your old,
Exactly.
because we've got the Sechaba trophy for the best artist of the year.
Exactly.
We've got the Penwell trophy for the best dancer, and at the lowest level, because if you can do it with 500 rand, 1,000 rand, by the time you have 100 million, it's going to be very easy to become Sir Donald Gordon
Sure.
and have the Gordon Medical School at Wits and the Gordon Res at Cares. And I think he was knighted because he was one of the biggest funders of the arts in the UK. And how we can get that done. Because even in America, Carnegie Hall, Andrew Carnegie,
Rockefellers.
even if it's just for ego, pride, wouldn't you like to see your name, the Thabo Mbeki? I think he's got a school now. Wouldn't you like to see your name, the Jacob Zuma competition for Maskandi?
Sure.
And in that way, you're like, the Jacob Zuma Foundation, through all the sponsors and whatever, they've created all these amazing Maskandi artists that have gone global.
Look, I mean, we have to also be careful because there's a lot of washing in things like this.
Washing of money?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And people do all kinds of things as a way to deviate from taxes or whatever.
Is that a bad thing?
I don't know.
It's a real thing, by the way.
Sure.
It's proper tax evasion avoidance.
Sure.
But I mean, if there's kids that might be
benefiting from it.
Yeah. But thank you for raising that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have to also not be naive about the whole situation. But, for me, what you're saying about small patrons, people who are, they're 5,000 rand, whatever, that actually then comes with education because we have to educate our patrons.
Yeah.
This idea that, for example, people are complaining about the politics in our country. How do you conscientize the masses? What tools do we have to conscientize the masses so that they can demand more?
Yeah.
And art is a very powerful tool.
100%.
How many people sit and watch Generations every day?
100%.
There's someone else who wrote an article critiquing my work, and she was saying that, I complain about the Tuscan house that we see everyone building.
Yeah.
And she says this is actually a form of a new vernacular, that Africans are taking on. And I'm like, well, if they knew that there were other options, would they still choose that one? Especially something that's actually a vernacular of Italy instead of theirs. Would they have the same interest in choosing this one? So, and by the way, our people are patrons. Those ones who are building those big mansions in the rurals, they are patrons. In Limpopo and wherever. But imagine they are choosing a design that is Italian.
Yeah.
In their,
Tuscan villa.
Yeah. In their knowledge of patronage.
Yeah.
So that's a choice that someone is making to invest in that particular thing. So do our patrons know that that's an option? When Patrice Motsepe decided that he's going to be a patron of the soccer.
Yeah. By the way, he's passionate about rugby. He eventually invested in the Blue Bulls. But as the story goes, I think I read it somewhere in an article, he realized that there'd be more of an impact if he went for Sundowns. But he has invested in the Blue Bulls now. Sorry, please carry on.
So what I'm saying is that
knowing that there are options and him choosing football.
Yeah, he chose football. But, if you think about R&B, why is R&B having enough consciousness? And this is like...
Rand Merchant Bank?
Yeah. These are people with money, right?
Yeah.
And there they are sponsoring artists.
100%.
The Oppenheimers. The Oppenheimers at their farm in Tswalu, which is in the Northern Cape. They have what's called an art residency.
Yeah.
And if you are, good with the Oppenheimers, you can go spend months just pontificating, and coming up with ideas and sketching and whatever. And then you go to Everard Reed, which is like one of the best art galleries.
It's my favorite gallery locally, yeah.
Sure, you should meet Mark. Maybe he'll want to talk to you. He's an interesting guy. And go and you go and exhibit there, at Everard Reed. Why? Why are the Oppenheimers? Is it just because they've got so much money they don't have anything to spend it on? Culture is a powerful thing.
Yeah.
It's a powerful thing. And those who run culture, those who own culture, are owning a lot of our values.
Correct.
And the things that we believe are true and not true.
Jeez, this was Kanye West speaking about who owns the culture.
Sure.
He was on a platform saying who owns the culture.
Exactly.
The clothes that we're wearing, the what, who owns that? Because it's not us.
Exactly.
But we wear it and we I'm wearing Gucci and Louis Vuitton, speaking about Tuscan villas in Italy.
Exactly.
We're wearing the Versace's and the... but we're the people promoting a culture that's not even really ours.
But that's why I'm saying we have to educate our patrons.
Yeah.
We have
I want to give a shout out, sorry to disturb you, on the art galleries. Standard Bank, which was my previous employer, they big in the arts.
Exactly.
And Robbie Brosen, one of my mentors, co-founder of Nando's with Fernando Duarte. Nando's, I think, is the biggest private art collector locally. And they also, if you go into any Nando's branch, you'll have a feel of the art, and they normally exhibit local artists.
Sure.
Sorry, please continue. You need to educate the patrons.
But, we do also have to appreciate what art is in terms of value.
Yeah.
Because if you do have a good artist and you buy that painting, we all know what that money is going to be like in a few years, right? So there is obviously a monetary value to that.
Yeah.
But it's also like architecture. One of the most famous buildings in the world, which was designed by a guy called Frank Gehry, was this like eccentric looking building that looked like a crumpled up piece of paper. And it was in a place called Bilbao. This architecture, in terms of the GDP of the town, before it was built and after it was built, looks incredibly different.
Yeah.
It went up by an incredible amount of points because of this building. Think about the building that's in Cape Town that was the Modern Art Gallery that's by Waterfront. That building was a patronage project, but they brought an architect from outside because that architect obviously gave even more value.
Yeah.
Because what those property developers are trying to do is they're trying to pump up the value of their properties.
Correct.
Because, this guy is, internationally renowned, and the building is this funky art gallery.
Yeah.
So you see,
brings tourists, brings money, brings interest.
Exactly. So there's value in that.
Yeah.
So now, what lessons can our patrons learn about that?
Have you ever visited the Zulu palaces? Sorry, I just thought about
KZN?
it now. Yeah.
No.
Would you want to visit them?
I'd love to.
And why?
It's another...
Sorry, I'm asking it's a trap question.
Oh. Well, I'm actually very interested in the relationship between Zulu, not Zulu, but tribal authorities and power and money in South Africa. Take Rustenburg, Royal Bafokeng, Platinum. How did they get it right?
Yeah.
That to me is an example of Wakanda. Like I told you, Platinum for me is vibranium.
100%.
What happened there, and why is it not happening everywhere else?
Sure. The reason I ask is because I'm thinking specifically about what you speak about, Bilbao and these places.
Yeah.
What would make anyone in the world want to visit a Zulu royal palace? Is there a huge statue of Ushaga? Is there a fantastic hut made of straw that it's the biggest in the world? If you think of the pyramids in Egypt, what fantastical architecture of Zulu origin is there at the royal palaces that would make the most random person be like, I hate Zulus, they're annoying, they're tribalist, but I just want to see the spectacle. When you go there, you spend money and.
You've basically just given someone a very good idea out there, because that's exactly what people do.
Yeah.
They build fantastic, incredible buildings, just like people will take money and go all the way to the Kruger Park, which is in the middle of nowhere. It's the same thing.
Paris and the Louvre.
Yeah, Paris and
Eiffel
the Louvre,
Tower.
Eiffel Tower, exactly. People spend money
Burj
to go
Khalifa, Chrysler Building.
Exactly. People spend money to go see these things.
Just to see them and to take a picture.
Exactly. And people from all over the world.
Yeah.
You
spoke about educating patrons, which I think is very important. I think I've spoken on the platform before that we need to educate new money to understand the importance of why they mustn't milk the cow till it bleeds.
Sure.
That you have to keep the ecosystem going. And then the investment in things like the arts, into sports, and they may not understand it. So you need to educate on the ripple effects of why investing in sports is good for the economy, good for your own business, good for etc. One of the biggest potential patrons we have in this country is the Public Investment Corporation, the PIC. I'm not sure if they have over 2 trillion or 3 trillion rand. They're the biggest fund on the African continent. Do you think they have a responsibility? Should we be speaking to them to be like, but guys, it's cool that you're investing in Steinhoff and you're losing our money and you're investing in these other businesses, but what artistic endeavors and spaces are you investing in as the PIC to push to what you were saying? generations. I've sat with great entrepreneurs who are like their first inspiration was generations.
Sure.
They were like, I want to sit in a boardroom like this. We didn't get to touch on music because you speak about the power of consciousness and conscientization. How do we use music? I know the Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria at some point was trying to use Davido and the guys to promote agriculture, to be like, let's make agriculture cool.
Sure.
Should the PIC or whoever's in charge, because I'm hoping whoever knows the people there, or some of the people I know, they are going to be watching this episode. Guys, we were watching this episode, Penal was sitting with Sechaba, and they were like, do we actually have a fund that is a patronage fund for the arts, for architecture? And can we be looking into that to conscientize our people to build a South Africa of the future?
Yeah, well,
because RMP is doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And many other people as well. Yeah, I think an organization like that would have to, although I don't really know much about them and what their priorities are, but surprisingly enough, government is very interesting, because I just came back from Italy last year in June to what's called the Architecture Biennale. So this is like the most prestigious place where you can go as an architect to present something. And there are...
What is it?
It's an architecture exhibition.
Expo,
it's like
exhibition.
An exhibition type of thing. And they're only... So you can either enter being invited by the person who curates the whole thing. And last year it was a black woman, actually, she's half Ghanaian, half Scottish. And she's the first black person to be in those crowds. So the thing is sponsored by Rolex, right? And there were even like instances where when we were there were parties we didn't know about. There was the Rolex party. I remember there's these architects who told me that they were invited, and when they got to the door, they were bounced.
Jeez. July lap.
Yeah, exactly.
You're not invited to this marquee.
Exactly. It's that type of space, right?
Shout out to that lady, by the way. I'll try and get her name and maybe put in the comments. And shout out to I don't know if it's the president or the vice chancellor, whatever they call the head of Harvard. Yeah. I didn't know it was a black woman as well.
Powerful.
Sure. But please continue.
Sure. Her name is Leslie Loco. She was actually head of school at the Graduate School of Architecture at UJ. So,
dope. That's dope.
She's got a powerful connection.
Fada.
Yeah, it's part of
under Fada.
Yeah. Okay. And actually, South Africa had the most representation there because she had such deep connections with South Africa. So
that's beautiful.
A lot of the presentations that were there were by South Africans.
Shout out to her, man. Jeez.
Yeah. And the whole thing was about decarbonization. But
that's what you do when you get into a space. You bring your people.
Exactly.
You bring your people. Shout out to her, Leslie.
Leslie Loco, yeah.
Loco.
Sure. So, South Africa, surprisingly, every country has a pavilion there. They call it a pavilion. It's like a structure which, you kind of own permanently, and that's where you exhibit your stuff. So there's a part where it's for the northern countries. It's not for them, but most of the northern countries are at this one part where there's a garden and whatever. So you see US, Britain, whatever. There's the British pavilion and the American pavilion. And it takes money to have a pavilion there. I mean, we were there and the Russia pavilion was closed because of obviously what's going on.
Yeah.
And then other countries like the southern countries also have pavilions there. South Africa was one of maybe 3 African countries that were represented there because of obviously the amount of money it takes to have that kind of thing there. And they paid... it was a tender process and whatever, and they paid a lot of money to get myself and other guys there as a team to represent South Africa. Yeah. And what was powerful for me about that was the fact that the government, through the current Minister of Arts, Sports and Culture...
Zizi.
Yeah.
Zizi.
I was there with him, very interesting character. Yeah. And we were there with Thibaut Touch, also another very interesting character. And... they paid for that, man. They paid for that. And, when I saw that, I was like, man, this is what it means if someone is actually backing your stuff up with money. Because to do something like that, you can imagine these northern countries, first world countries, they've got so much cash, it's possible for them to do that. For us, it's a different story, but South Africa managed to do something like that.
I'm honored that you're here to speak about it because we don't know about these things.
Ish.
And one of my biggest criticisms of the ANC, of which I hate the ANC today and it pisses me off, sorry to your dad, is their inability or your inability to market the good work you've done.
Yeah.
To a point where, yes, we see the potholes, we see the load shedding, which is bad. And I believe the ANC, I think everyone believes the ANC can govern much better, especially without corruption and especially with more meritocracy, getting qualified people to do certain things. But now on the other side is all the villages where you've put tarred roads and the thousands of kilometers. And you can make like a short film or documentary.
Sure.
And all the homes where people would use long drops. And today Ukoko goes and flushes the toilet.
Sure.
Because I've seen it. I've seen it in my grandmother, my mother's house. We used to use the bucket system.
Sure.
Her brother used to work for the truck that used to come and collect the buckets. So I used to shit in a bucket.
Sure.
Today there's a flushable toilet. We used to sleep in a hut when I'd visit my grandmother when I was young. Today they've got an RDP house. They've extended it. You can see this in real time and you're like, you're struggling to sell this story. Yes, you can do it for votes and for campaigning, but just to be like, guys, criticize us, hate us, it's fine. But we want to show you all the children that are alive today because of ARV rollouts. We want to show you all the gokos today that can get their medicine in walking distance, where in the past they had to catch a bus or a steamer. We want to show you in real time so that when we've been criticized by the DA or by white people or by people that hate us, it could be black people, whoever, we just want you to know that, yes, maybe one day we'll lose power. One day you'll criticize us. But we want to document. This is the work we've done. We took Sechaba to Biennale. To the Biennale. And we were trying, guys. This was us trying.
Sure.
Zizi Wadwa, social media. You come on our platforms. Tibo Touch. Speak about it. You've got a huge platform. Speak about these things and let people know and be like, young kids, you're going into grade 11, grade 12. Architecture is a real thing. We've got Leslie Loco, who was at UJ, who's now head of something global and huge.
Yeah.
One of my other mentors when I first got to Joburg, Mandla Sbego, I think he's one of the founders of the FNB Joburg Art Fair.
Yeah.
Young black guy. It's like, bro, because he commissioned artworks from me when he owned Pick and Pay in Kliptown. For Mother's Day, Father's Day, I did some artworks for him to turn into cards to hand out to all mama and all baba. Like that's patronage.
Sure.
Those are real things, and these are the stories that we need to tell. So I'm honored that you're here to have come to tell us about it, and I hope more people are going to go research the PNL and how to get involved.
Yeah, to be fair to Touch, he and I were on Metro FM talking about it, but because people don't really know what we're talking about, it was only architects, especially black young architects, my students,
that plugged in.
They were like, "Hey, sir, that was dope. You were with Tibo Touch." But yeah, again, architecture is just one of those things that was always about privilege. It's still very much about privilege.
Yeah.
It's about the guys who are the patrons who've got the money, who can afford to build these buildings that we're talking about. And regarding the Biennale and the government and talking about the failures of the ANC, I also think that, if I was critiquing the whole thing, I'd be like, yeah, but, at the end of the day, they may have done one nice thing. But what about all the other things? And that's what, naturally someone would say,
Sure.
which I don't blame,
But that's where patronage comes in. You've got the ANC, which struggles with money now, for whatever reason. But it's like at the lowest level, can we fund the after students to make films about the work we're doing? Can we fund the UJ Wits Art School, UCT, I think it's the Michaelis School of Arts, whatever.
Yeah.
Can we fund them to make artworks about the women of the struggle?
Sure.
As an exhibition idea. Mary Sbande, I think, can make sculptures and just do these things at the lowest level and be like, this is going to be how we campaign.
Yeah.
Hugh Masekela is going to release an album. I see the EFF does it now with Abo Ringo and Ombuisen and their jazz albums. Like, guys, this is the thing.
Yeah, I mean, and ultimately, again, if we go back to our conversation about what the value of all of this stuff is, if the ANC does do this type of work to conscientize the masses, to maybe it's a dangerous thing also for them, for the masses to be conscientized, but to conscientize the masses and for people to demand better. And hopefully, which is why I'm here, that's what this conversation is about.
I'd like to close off this conversation here. I think you and I have a lot to chat about.
Sure.
We never got a chance to unpack your thoughts on Orania because I've got a view of, at least in the medium term, turning townships into Orania and what we can learn from Orania. I'm planning to visit this year. US Stradom has offered me an invite, who's one of the leaders there. How do we take that model and what they've been able to do and plug it into certain townships?
Please ask them who their patron is, because that's what the key thing
They'll
is.
tell you that their patron is themselves, like Afreeforum. They'll be like, it's the ordinary man. The reason I raised the PIC as an example is because that's where black people don't have money.
Sure,
Black money sits at the PIC.
sure.
Black money sits at the GEPF. Black money sits at Old Mutual.
Sure.
Black money sits at Sanlam.
Sure.
And the question is who up there, because maybe it's white executives, but they do have black representatives that are sitting there. And how are they speaking, or when are they speaking about patronage? Like, guys, look, I am Patrice. I don't know what his trust fund with Sanlam is, Batu something, Batu Pili or whatever the case is. Can we have some of this money and can we put it in the arts in townships? Because some of our premium, is it called the premium payers, the subscribers at Sanlam, are black people. I'm at Old Mutual. I'm Peter Moyo. I know you had a fight with Trevor Manuel, whatever. But you sit there and you're like, I know Old Mutual does the races. Old Mutual does the choirs. So things like that.
Yeah.
And then at the PIC, what are we doing for? So Afreeforum will tell you that it's just the ordinary white Afrikaner and maybe a Penwell now and then who puts in a bit of money. The guys at Orania will tell you, we clean up our own yards. We do our own things. There was flooding recently and the community went and they rolled up their sleeves and they tried to sort it out, which is something we've had in the past as black people. Today we're like, and you're like, really? To take a shovel and to close this thing?
But how did they get that land in the first place?
They bought the land. The question maybe would be, where does the money come from? Because Karel Boshoff, I think, might be the nephew of one of the apartheid leaders.
Sure.
We can ask that question. But to your question of where did they get the land, Misuzulu is in charge of close to 3 million hectares of Ingonyama land.
Sure.
The Royal Bafokeng have got land. Oli Khanyan and the ZCC Church have got land. I know black people with thousands and thousands of hectares. And the question is, when are you building a stain city, a waterfall city, of which waterfall city sits on Indian Muslim land, which is the Mia family in Johannesburg. So what are you guys doing with your land to build Sun City like Saul Kersner? And then I want us to speak about Wakanda as a concept, whether that is what Africans should be aspiring to with their version of vibranium, whether it's gold, platinum, cobalt, lithium today. How do you turn Zimbabwe or the DRC into Wakanda? But do we want those types of buildings? Or do we want to go into something eco, green? When are we building our versions of the pyramids? Whatever that may look like. We're going to call it the pyramids as a concept, but what is going to be our architectural legacy? Where people are like, they were Sechaba back in the day. I don't think that was a real man. You're like, maybe he was like a school of architecture that went around building these structures which influenced the whole world.
Sure.
And I hope you'll honor me in discussing that and just how we maximize land usage as well.
Sure.
South Africans live on about 1 to 2% of the land. A big chunk of it is as agricultural. But if you travel around this country, you'll see just land chilling. But we're all living in squatter camps and townships and in flats on top of each other. And it's like, is that the best usage of land? And maybe your own personal vision of what you'd like to see, whether you build it or you inspire it, happening here on the continent and maybe globally.
We need to talk again.
Any closing words, thoughts for you? Anything that you were like, when I sit with Pen, I'm going to tell him, Dwana, I fucking hate your beard, you must shave. Or, anything that you just want to get off your chest.
No, if anything, when I look at your beard, you remind me a lot of myself. I look at you and I'm like...
this guy.
No, for real. I look at you and I'm like, Penuel, there's something there where I feel like I can relate. And maybe that's another powerful thing about your show, is that there are people out there who can relate.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping that there are more people like myself who can come onto your show and we can really have more of these kind of discussions.
Yeah.
And hopefully they don't become the disappointment that you spoke about with the children of the cadres.
Yeah, that's true. Hey, that's a conversation all on its own. There's a Mutswenyane grandson that I had a conversation with, Dr. Sam Mutswenyane. These are the founders of African Bank and Navcock. And the conversation around legacy kids is what I call them. You guys. You guys have a responsibility. And if you're dizzy, then some of us need to become I don't know how you pronounce this word, a consigliere, the right-hand man of the Godfather.
Sure.
We must come and tell you guys to catch a wake up.
Yeah.
And it's something I do with white privilege because I'm privileged to be in spaces with rich white people to be like, you guys have dropped the ball. You guys need to do more. You guys need to fund the Siyakolisi's, not just in rugby, but maybe in architecture or whatever. You've got the money, you've got the means. And then do the same with the legacy kids. Your parents have the means and the access. If you can't do it, find someone who's fucking brilliant. Stand next to them so that you look dope. Mandla Sbego.
Mandela.
Mandela. I went to Rhodes with him, by the way.
Sure.
Yeah. I'm hoping to sit with him and so many other people. And we'll have these chats. But Sechaba Maape, thank you so much. Thank you for bringing us into your world, for educating, for enlightening. And I'm looking forward to our next sit down.
Thanks, man.
Cheers.